Prynawn da pawb. Ymddiheuriadu am yr oedi, problemau technegol. Prynawn da a croeso chi prynawn yma. Diolch I chi am ymuno, dyn ni'n gwybod pa mor brysur I chi ar hyn o bryd a faint o'r bwyslais sydd arnoch chi, felly diolch yn fawr. Good afternoon all. Apologies for the technical difficulties and the delay. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate how busy you all are at the moment and the pressures that you're under, so it's very much appreciated. Just some very quick housekeeping rules. Just to say this session is being recorded, so for those of us not able to join us this afternoon, they will be able to see this. There's also an opportunity, as you will see, to ask questions and to pose comments throughout this. Felly, heb oedi mwyach, hoffwn groesawu'r gweinidog y Gymraeg ac addysg I ychydig o eiriau. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Minister for Education and Welsh Language to say a few words, and there will be an opportunity after the Minister has spoken for a Q&A. Felly, gweinidog.
Diolch Owen, a mae'n bleser cael ymuno gyda'r sgwrs heddi, yn falch o gael cyfle I siarad yn uniongyrchol am ffordd I ni yn bwrw wrthi gyda'r sialens a'r cyfle o adnewyddu a diwygio addysg yma yng Nghymru. Ond dwi ddim am i'r sesiwn fod yn un lle dwi jyst yn siarad a chythau'n gwrando rwy'n awyddus iawn I glywed cwestiynau a'r sylwadau sydd gyda chi. Byddai'n falch iawn o ateb y cwestiynau sydd ganddo chi ar y diwedd. Mae'r broses yma o ddaialog yn credu yn un ni'n tra phwysig. Mae wedi gweithio i'n helpu ni I gydweithio dros y flwyddyn diwetha wrth bod ni'n cefnogi yn dysgwyr ac mae wedi bod yn help yn y blynyddoedd wrth bod ni'n paratoi tuag at cyd-awdurdo a chyflwyno y cwricwlwm newydd. Ers I fi ddechrau ar y swydd hon, rwy wedi treulio gymaint o amser â phosib yn gwrando ar staff a dysgwyr o ysgolion ac o golegau a lleoliadau eraill ac rwy wedi fy hynna'n cael fy ysbrydoli gan y ffordd mae pawb wedi bod yn addasu I heriau'r pandemig. Ond rwy hefyd yn ymwybodol iawn o'r anawsterau I chi wedi bod yn I wynebu ac yn dal I wynebu a hefyd beth sydd angen I ni I wneud I helpu chi a'ch staff a'n dysgwyr yn I gyd. Dwi ddim yn tan ystyru'r sialensau I chi'n wynebu, credwch fi. I want to say something a little bit initially around the transmission of the virus and the infection rates. At the moment, infection rates in the 10 to 19-year-old cohort appear to be levelling off. We've seen this in the latest Public Health Wales Education Weekly statistics. This actually does reflect Welsh Government modelling, but it's, I think, important that we remain cautious and we will probably need to wait a couple of weeks before we can confirm a trend in the numbers across a number of weeks. So far, we are following the pattern that we have seen taking place in Scotland. Schools there obviously returned in mid-August, and following a peak there, the figures have been continuing to decline. But I don't underestimate how difficult and indeed how overwhelming the situation will feel in some schools. Some of the key concerns that you've identified with us in advance of this session, I'll try to address some of these in my comments now. You can see some of them highlighted on the screen there. I'm sure that they will all look very familiar to many of you. So I'm going to try and address some of those in my comments now, and there will be a further opportunity with Owen and the panelists later to explore more of those in greater detail. But we are on a transformation journey in our education system, and that obviously will always raise concerns and anxieties. And I appreciate as well that some schools will feel more confident perhaps than others about where they are on their journey. But what I would say is that September 2022 is not the point in time when everything starts to change. That process of change is already underway, it's already happening. We can look at the transformation that's already happened towards curriculum reform, and the steps which are being taken right across the education system to support well-being and progression throughout the period of the last 12 to 18 months of the pandemic. The additional learning needs system has come into force. Changes are being phased in, as you know, over time. It will take time to bed in. I absolutely recognise that. We will be publishing further guidance imminently to assist you in the implementation of those reforms. And I believe that time is important in the journey that we're on at the moment, which is why I made the decision to provide some flexibility in the rollout of the new curriculum, recognising obviously the challenges that the pandemic has overlaid on the work that schools were carrying out to prepare for the curriculum. But I think in the midst of the reform journey that we're on, I think it's important to remember and to remind ourselves really why we are undertaking the journey, why we're making the changes. The new curriculum, as we will all know, is about supporting and enabling better educational outcomes for all our learners. We want to provide all our children and young people with the best possible tools they can have to succeed in life. That really is our bottom line. Whether that's about funding, whether it's about support for learners transitioning from school, or funding to help schools to provide extra teaching capacity to support the particular needs of early years learners, whether it's about creating space to focus on your particular school's priorities or what your learners need, in the way that we've suspended full requirements of the current national curriculum, suspending performance measures, pausing categorisation, and Eston's suspension of their core inspection programme into the autumn term. And crucially as well, supporting learner mental health and well-being. We can't expect learners to study well and engage in everything that education has to offer if they're struggling to cope mentally, if they're struggling to cope emotionally. And what you've achieved, what schools have achieved so far, I think in the most challenging possible circumstances, I think should give us all confidence in the journey that lies ahead. I know you're already focused on the big things that support learners to achieve. On top of the innovation taking place in schools, we've been working to further improve the curriculum, ensuring that Black, Asian and minority ethnic experiences are integral to the new curriculum, clearly embedding Welsh language within the new curriculum, committing to deliver the pedagogy and support to enable all learners to develop bilingually along that single continuum. We've also continued to work on the new framework for evaluation, improvement and accountability, aligning that with the thrust of the broader reforms. And that's going to allow schools to have a more central role in driving their own improvement with that robust underpinning of self-evaluation. The focus that we have as a government and our partners have is on the kind of practical support that we can give to schools so that you feel safe and secured and and supported. We're working together to support you on that kind of approach of co-construction, really at all levels, developing a more responsive support system. Eston is refocusing its inspection programme, currently asking for your views on that. I'm sure Claire will be happy to respond in more detail during the Q&A on how they will be supporting schools on the next stage of the journey. Qualifications Wales, as you will have seen, has announced today their decision with regards to the future GCSEs to support the new curriculum. They'll be working with partners to further develop these, and Philip obviously is here to answer any questions that you may have in relation to that. Our new national network sets out our shared agenda. That's an opportunity for you to tell us and the regions and other partners what you need and where you need help as a group. And alongside this, the regional consortia and the partnerships will continue to facilitate the conversations between schools to build up that self-improving system that we all want to see. But we are here to help because we recognise the pressure that you have been under and that you continue to be under. and your staff right across the school workforce have played an extraordinary role over the last 18 months. We need to continue working together so that we can all progress along the journey that we're on and provide the support that you need in order to do that and to support your learners to achieve their potential as we all want to see. That, I think, is the promise, if you like, of the new curriculum. I'm absolutely confident we'll be able to achieve that, and keen to support you in all that you're doing to make that a reality. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Owen.
Diolch yn fawr, Gweinidog. A fel wedys ti ar y dechrau, mae hwnna'n gyfle yn amlwg i brif athrawon i glywed yn uniongyrchol gennych chi, ond hefyd iddyn nhw, mae hwn yn gyfle iddyn nhw gofyn cwestiynau, felly mae rai yn dechrau dod trwyddo yn ara bach. So yes, as I said, Minister, as you said at the start, this is not just an opportunity for you to address head teachers, but also, you know, for them to kind of provide feedback and to ask you questions. And I know you've got a little bit of time now to be able to do that. So I would encourage people to post. There are a few coming through. So I'll start with the first question, if that's okay, Minister. And that is, I suppose, a reflection in terms of, you know, the current pressures that head teachers are facing, and obviously the disruption from the third wave currently throughout schools in Wales. So what do you feel in terms of how is the system going to deliver both curriculum reform, a new ALN system, and the other expectations during this academic year, given the pressures that people are currently feeling? What are your views on that? Hi, Minister, you've muted yourself.
Oh, forgive me. I'm not doing well with the technology today, apologies. So I was saying that, as I said in my opening comments, I'm conscious that there is a range of experiences across the school system about the feeling of being ready for the new curriculum. I think it's really important that we look at September 2022, not as, you know, the beginning, if you like. There's a process of preparation which has been going on for a long time. That is the rolling out of the next stage, but that itself is the beginning of a new stage of the journey, if you like. And you know, we will be on an iterative journey from September 22 onwards. But I don't underestimate the challenges of managing the pressures of COVID and the reforms to ALN alongside moving forward into the launch and the rollout of the new curriculum. I'm hopeful that the publication which we made available in the last few weeks, which seeks to bring together, if you like, some of the requirements and interventions around COVID and the curriculum, conveys the sense that we aren't looking to pull in opposite directions. We're trying to make sure that these experiences are aligned. You know, I've said previously in earlier discussions that I think that the kind of creativity and the focus on learner well-being and the kind of innovation and flexibility that we've seen over the last year or more are a very firm foundation, really, for a successful curriculum. That's what the curriculum itself, the new curriculum itself, requires. So I think sort of bridging between one and the other, I think, is the objective. I'm not suggesting it isn't without its challenges. On the ALN front, obviously this is a very significant set of reforms. I'm very clear that they are the right reforms for our learners. Obviously, as many will know, we have staggered the introduction of the reforms, mindful of the fact that, you know, the impact of COVID has been significant, and so I hope that staggering the rollout of ALN reforms will be helpful to schools and to learners as well. Obviously, the next stage now starts in January of next year. I'm conscious that there is an appetite for more guidance in relation to how those reforms will be managed and run, and we're expecting to publish some further guidance imminently, which I hope will be helpful. But very keen to hear, and I'm sure we'll have this discussion later, the experiences of schools themselves in managing those three priorities.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. So the next question I have is one from Chris Britton. So could you articulate your understanding of the impact that COVID is having on leadership teams and teachers in Wales at this time?
Yes, I can. Chris, thank you for that question. I think that for many schools, it's a very, very challenging situation at the moment, isn't it? And I think, in many ways, probably one could argue, I'm sure many would, that it's perhaps the most challenging part, in a sense, apart from maybe the very, very early period of COVID, because transmission rates are very high in the community. Obviously, the vaccination has made a very significant difference to the relationship between infection and serious illness, as we know. But we all have the shared ambition to make sure that our learners can be in school, having lost the time that they have over the last year or 18 months. So that's a very challenging set of circumstances for heads and teachers to be managing. And I don't underestimate for a second what that must mean in terms of the pressures, in particular on school leaders in managing staff absence, managing pupil absence. I think there are a range of challenges which come in that area. I'm aware that there's a significant pressure on getting supply support, supply cover for staff absence. From a kind of funding point of view, obviously we've sought to support that by continuing the access to the hardship fund so that supply costs can be covered. But I also know from talking to heads that actually it isn't so much the funding, it's the question of getting supply teachers into schools. I know that in my own local area and talking to heads elsewhere. There are some things which we are looking at to see what we can do as a government to help with that. One of the issues we've heard is around DBS checks taking too long. So we've written to the DBS to see what we can do to encourage them to speed that up so that we can hopefully support more supply teachers available. I think there's also a set of challenges around managing remote learning for those learners who aren't in school, but also delivering tuition in the classroom as well. So I recognise there's a range of tensions which heads are facing. My task, I think, is to try and reconcile the various challenges that we can contribute to supporting. Really, I want to make sure that we have guidance which is very clear as possible. I know there have been some questions around some of the aspects of guidance. I hope we've been able to clarify that for school leaders. We've also made some funding available in terms of CO2 monitors, and you'll have seen today an announcement around ventilation, so some kind of practical steps to help support schools in that way. But obviously this is part of an ongoing dialogue, and we're in constant discussion with our colleagues in local education authorities and teaching unions, but also keen to hear from you what more you think we can do.
Okay, diolch. And you just covered one of the questions which has just popped up, Minister, was around that additional support, the announcement today. So thank you for that. So question here around cases in schools, and obviously you will know that they've been very high since the start of term. So two parts to this question. Are they what we expected as a Welsh Government, firstly? And then the second one is around, are there any plans to introduce more measures at the national level?
Well, the modelling for the rates of transmission for the virus generally, since the start of the pandemic, actually, has been provided for us by Swansea University. They've provided a model which enables us to, well, it's not a prediction, it's a sort of range of possibilities, if you like. But it has been pretty helpful throughout in terms of a guide to the future pattern of the pandemic. And so we've been able to draw on that data and advice on the one hand, but we've also been able to look at what has been happening in Scotland, where the term obviously starts a few weeks before the term does in Wales. And the pattern of what appears to be happening now and what has been happening over the last few weeks, is broadly consistent with what those two experiences tell us. So in that sense, what we've seen is within the range of things which we felt, how we felt it would perhaps develop over the last few weeks. But I want to be clear that, as I said at the start of what I was saying earlier, there is an understandable desire, I think, on the part of all of us, certainly on my part, and I know this is widely shared, to look at the data week by week and grasp hold of any positive, numbers. But I do think it's important for us to let that settle. Perhaps, we've got another week ahead of us before the half term, and that will, I think, give us more information about where the trajectory is of the numbers. The question about the national picture, if you like, a national any further steps. The way that the system works, as colleagues will know, is that the underlying risk analysis, if you like, is done on a kind of cross-sectoral basis, and there's a Wales-wide analysis, and that is what informs the alert levels, and we're obviously at alert level 0 at the moment. What we've published in the last few weeks is the updated coronavirus control plan, which some of you may have seen. It's on the website if you haven't and you wish to, and it describes the most likely scenarios over the coming weeks and what that would mean in terms of Wales-wide response, if you like. And to the best of our ability to look forward, we think that we are likely to be able to progress through the winter and autumn months with the same basket, if you like, of restrictions that we currently have. You'll have heard the First Minister talking elsewhere about his hope and expectation that we have, we're heading towards a Christmas which will feel more normal, certainly, than last year's did. But we are also very, very conscious and clear of the fact that could be those plans, if you like, could be upset by the development or introduction of a new variant which might be resistant to the vaccine and so on. So, there may be unpredictable aspects which we would need to clearly respond to. And I think the other dimension is the pressure, obviously, on the health system in particular, which is, as you will all know, very acute. So these things are kept under review. Clearly, if we felt that there was a need to introduce new restrictions, then obviously we would have to do that. But the current modelling suggests that the most likely pattern over the coming weeks is more or less the level of restriction that we currently have. Just finally, that's the national picture. All colleagues will know about the frameworks which apply at a national level but respond to local circumstances. I think 8 out of 22 of our local authorities are currently operating a mix of mitigations in schools which are not at the lower level, if you like, and I think I'm right in saying they're all operating at the high level or a mix of the high level interventions. I don't for a second suggest the frameworks are, have always been straightforward to apply from the get-go. These things, I think, necessarily take some time to become familiar tools, but I think, that to me suggests that they are capable of flexing to respond to local circumstances. And obviously some schools have introduced configurations within the classroom, one-way systems, the wearing of face masks outside the classroom and so on to reflect their local circumstances. So the challenge we have is what's the kind of Wales-wide framework and how can that be made to reflect local circumstances?
Okay, diolch yn fawr. I've got a few questions here actually in terms of examinations, which no doubt we can pick up later with Philip. But somebody just wants to know your view, Minister, in terms of, is it really fair and considerate in terms of pupil and staff well-being to go ahead with exams next summer?
The commitment that we made this year and that I made as Education Minister was to make sure that our learners this year were not disadvantaged, and that remains my commitment in relation to next year's cohort. I think that I hope and expect that the experience of the school year this year, notwithstanding what we've been talking about this first half term, will be obviously very different to the experience of last year. In the longer term, I want us to be able to draw on the experience of this summer and last summer in terms of the role of teacher assessment in forming qualifications for our learners. But I do think that requires, planning and reflection. It isn't no one wants to design assessment and qualifications, over a short horizon. These things obviously take some time to develop and roll out. So I do think that it's the right approach to move back to examinations next summer. But if circumstances are not as we hope they will be, then Qualifications Wales has also obviously announced a contingency plan for that, which seeks to align with assessments which teachers will be undertaking with their learners in any event over the coming months. We'll keep these things under review. We've also, I think, provided additional resource to enable schools to support learners in exam years with additional tuition and support, as well as resources for exam preparation and so on. And that is designed specifically to give more support to those learners facing exams next year, to give them the best possible opportunity. We've also, I think, where remote learning is needed, as it has been in many schools over the last few weeks, I hope you would agree that that is a much better offer than perhaps it was necessarily at the start of the pandemic. And whilst obviously we want to see children in classrooms learning, I do think that has provided a better resource space for when pupils have to be at home. So I hope that mix of interventions gives next year's cohort the best possible opportunity.
Okay, and just conscious of your time, Minister, have you got time for one last quick question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so I've got one here around the curriculum. So this questioner asks, why have you not delayed the start of curriculum reform for primary schools in the same way that you have for secondaries?
Okay, so the work that we did to assess readiness in schools, working with consortia, talking directly to practitioners, and the surveys that we undertook of schools' perception of their own readiness showed a very clear picture, I think. There was a much higher level of perceived readiness among school leaders in the primary sector than, and the picture was more mixed, if I can put it like that, in the secondary sector. And I think in a way that was not hugely surprising, because I think the journey that primary schools have been on has taken them along that road faster than it has for secondary schools, for reasons that we would all understand. So if you start from the point of saying that we think the curriculum is the right thing for our learners in Wales, as obviously we do, then there needs to be a special justification, if you like, for moving away from that. Now, clearly COVID has clearly had a significant impact, we've just been talking about it. But despite that, the level of readiness that primary schools felt they had was, I think, certainly at the level which would not have justified, asking the whole system to delay that for a further year. I do think the picture is slightly different in secondary schools. I'm very hopeful that secondary schools that feel ready to introduce the curriculum for year 7 from next September will do that, but they have the opportunity, obviously, of delaying that by a year so that it's rolled out for years 7 and 8 together the following year. It felt to me that struck the right balance in making steps towards, towards the destination that we all are heading towards, maintaining the overall timetable, but providing that additional level of flexibility for the part of the system that most needed it.
Okay, diolch yn fawr, Gweinidog. Dwi'n gwybod bod amser yn bryn, felly diolch yn fawr I chi am ymuno ni pnawn yma. Thank you very much, Minister, for joining us this afternoon.
Croeso, and diolch yn fawr iawn.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. Okay, so we'll move on now to the next session. And up front, there's just, I think, a slideshow which should hopefully appear on your screen and on mine shortly, that I would just like to quickly take you through, and then there'll be a question for more Q&A in terms of with some panel guests. So I'm waiting to see the slide. Okay, so part of the feedback that we've received on a regular basis is around greater clarity as to where we are with the key reforms, the support that's available, and also the space to focus on delivery. So we thought it would be helpful to just quickly take you through where we are in terms of that journey and the support available. There'll then be an opportunity, as I said, to discuss in more detail and to have some questions and some answers. As well as myself, Georgina Harhoff, who leads on curriculum and assessment, Kevin Palmer, who leads on pedagogy, leadership and professional learning. We also have joining us this afternoon, Claire Morgan from Estyn, Gareth Morgans, representing local authorities from ADU, Philip Blaker from Quals Wales, and Debbie Hartveld, representing the consortia. So, we know that the pandemic has affected preparations for reform, as the Minister has referred to earlier, and the recent survey results from the Education Workforce Council survey and Government Social Research Service shows the challenges we face on this journey. But I know, and the Minister knows from talking to heads, teaching staff and others in the education sector, that there remains a strong commitment to these reforms. And as the Minister said earlier on, there is already a huge amount of preparation that's been undertaken by yourselves and your staff, and the journey will continue beyond September 2022 and September 2023. But we do recognise the importance of having a clear national structure in place to support implementation, backed up by strong regional and local support. So, last month we published the Journey to Curriculum Reform rollout document. The national network, which we announced, will provide the space for us, the middle tier and yourselves to come together to share learning, build capability and set out the priorities for national support. We have now laid the What Matters code and progression code. Regional consortia have provided a one-stop website for each region, and they are working with schools to ensure that this support is targeted to ensure all learners are able to gain the benefits of the new curriculum. And this is backed by over 7 million in funding to support curriculum development in this financial year. Regional consortia and other school improvement services will continue to offer the detailed guidance and tailored support needed to ensure that all schools progress on this journey. And you will have, of course, seen the announcement last week from Quals Wales in terms of arrangements for 2022. Turning briefly to professional learning. So the national conversation, Talk Pedagogy, Think Learning, is underway and engages schools, regional consortia, HEIs, Estyn, the Leadership Academy and other stakeholders in the co-construction of our understanding of pedagogy and learning in relation to the 4 purposes of the new curriculum. We're allocating additional funding of around 3 million to support the development and delivery of national professional learning programmes linked to key areas, such as supporting PL for RVE, RSE and inclusive schools and anti-racism training, as recommended by the report on Cynhadledd in the new curriculum. We recognise the scale of the challenge that you and other leaders face in light of the current situation. And for this reason, we will continue to provide support to you as leaders through the National Academy for Educational Leadership Wales, the professional learning offer in the regions, and the National Professional Qualification for Headship. And finally, in terms of learning design, regions, schools and universities are working to deliver the Welsh Collaborative for Learning Design. Turning to additional learning needs, we know the pandemic has created specific challenges for particular groups of learners, including those with ALN. Despite the restrictions necessitated by the pandemic, the ALN system remains a key priority, as the Minister mentioned earlier, and we will continue to work with all partners and stakeholders to ensure its successful implementation. The 3-year implementation period, as you know, began on September the 1st, 2021, using a phased approach in the first year. The new system is now live for those who are newly identified as potentially having ALN. The next phase will begin on the 1st of January 2022. Now, we've recognised the importance of providing extra support at this time, and provided an additional 17.8 million to schools and colleges to support additional learning needs in 2020-21, and 9.8 million of that was specifically in response to pressures arising from the pandemic. A further 8 million has been provided in 2021-22 to local authorities and further education institutions to flexibly support children and young people with ALN, especially those with high or complex needs. And we continue to review support needs in this space and in the context of both recovery from the pandemic and implementation of the ALN reform agenda. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail in terms of this slide, but it's a summary of the steps already taken to create space and flexibility. And the Minister's previously committed to continue to look at ways of easing potential pressures within the system, and we remain open to ideas in this space. In terms of school transparency and improvement, we know we need an approach to accountability that aligns with the thrust of our reforms, and there is work needed to support this journey. We will be publishing new school improvement guidance in the coming period, summarising the framework for evaluation, improvement and accountability as a whole. School improvement guidance will make clear the central role of schools in driving their own improvement, underpinned by robust self-evaluation, while having access to high quality support proportionate to your needs from other schools, regional consortia and local authorities. In terms of ESTIN, whilst core inspection activity has been suspended, ESTIN has continued to engage with schools to listen to concerns and identify what is working well and share best practice with other schools. These visits have gathered intelligence on the education system, but also gauged the immediate and longer term impact of the pandemic on learning and the well-being of pupils and staff. During the spring term 2022 next year, ESTIN will pilot new inspection arrangements, seeking agreement from individual providers to be involved. And other than these pilot inspections and monitoring visits to schools in an ESTIN statutory category, schools and PRUs will not be inspected before Easter 2022 unless there are exceptional circumstances. So, to summarise before we go into a Q&A, and I'll introduce the panel. Through Renew and Reform, we've made available over 80 million over the last 2 years directly into schools and settings to provide capacity to support learners' well-being and progression. We've looked at the flexibility through the pandemic to try different ways of working, but the landscape is varied now for schools, particularly in secondary. The focus has to be from government on clarity and simplicity and clear prioritisation of effort across the system. And finally, there needs to be clear continued commitment to understand the issues and to reduce unnecessary bureaucracy to support school leaders. So, it's with huge delight I turn next to the panel, who hopefully you will see in front of you and I will see in front of me. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have Debbie, Philip, Claire, Gareth, Georgina and Kevin all joining us. And this is an opportunity really, based on what you've heard from the Minister earlier, from some of the questions we've had already, but in terms of Q&A now, which I hope will flow through in terms of what I've said, to hear the views of the panel in terms of kind of your issues, your concerns and your questions. So, are there any new questions coming through, first of all, before I turn to the panel? Okay, so one of the questions which actually came through to the Minister earlier, and I'm just looking at now. So you talk a lot about staff doing a wonderful job supporting pupils' well-being, but what about head teacher and staff well-being? Head teachers are often in the firing line of stress, having to manage the change. We're worried about increasing accountability, about inspections and so on and so forth. How do you respond to this? So, first of all, in terms of accountability, I'd like to turn firstly, well, maybe we'll start off in terms of ESTIN and inspections and so on. So Claire, can I turn to you first of all in terms of just where ESTIN are currently and the support that you're trying to provide the system?
Diolch, Owain. I think probably I would start with the focus on a new inspection framework, because the framework that we've just published on our website has got an increased focus on well-being. But that's not only for students, that's well-being of staff. So we'll be looking at a school's arrangements for supporting all their pupils, but also supporting all their staff. So we've certainly increased the focus on well-being. But in terms of what Estyn has been doing during the pandemic, I think we made a pretty swift decision to suspend our inspection activity right at the start of the pandemic. Then we slowly and sensitively to offer support to the system. That was in various forms, but probably one of the most significant parts has been engagement with every school and every post-16 provider. So throughout this pandemic, we engaged with over 50 school leaders and post-16 principals and leaders to offer support, but also to listen to the challenges and hear about the challenges firsthand. Now, that support initially was remote, but as things slightly improved in the summer term, that moved to more face-to-face engagement. And initially, the conversations were about how do we keep our learners learning? How do we look after the well-being of our learners, of our staff? But it soon moved on to remote learning, evaluating remote learning. And as the years gone on, some schools have wanted to discuss more about curriculum and preparing for the ALN reform. So it's been engaging with schools and gathering first-hand intelligence about the challenges, also the creative solutions, the many creative solutions we've been, and that intelligence we've used to support our work and also to support policy development and the work that Welsh Government had been doing to help learners to be continuing to learn during the pandemic.
Okay, diolch yn fawr, Claire. So the next question I have is possibly for you, Kevin. So there are a few coming through here in terms of the theme around kind of staff retention and staff recruitment, and a specific here, Kevin, in terms of, is it possible to extend the NQT scheme to the summer term to help with staffing issues?
Yeah, thanks, Owain. I don't think it is. You know, I just want to say a few things and then perhaps give you a sense of why. The first thing is that the money that came to us in order to enable this scheme to happen came from a COVID response budget, which was an immediate crisis, an immediate budget. And the money was there primarily to meet the needs of those newly qualified teachers for whom induction was going to be a challenge because they hadn't had enough contact time in school. It obviously also had the effect of putting additional resource into school, and I've had so many conversations with head teachers where they said this is just brilliant, you know, and it's right, it is. We've managed to put 400 people into placements and pay their salaries for a term. We've never done it before, and it's been a really positive scheme, but of course you can only do what you can afford to do. So we're not in a normal budgetary environment. We are as a department trying to get something to happen, not just in the next school term, but also on a more permanent basis around, you know, what happens when people come out of initial teacher ed and what more can we do for them and for you. What I would say is if we can't get it, we can't get it. But we will have triple RS on an ongoing basis in the next school term, in the next school term and in the next school year. So I'm going to keep trying. I should say Georgina is like, you know, such an enormous support in getting this stuff done. But we will keep trying to get something to address that question. But I don't want to fill you with hope and then disappoint you. It doesn't look very likely.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. There's another question. There's a question here in terms of school budgets and so on. Can we expect cuts to school budgets in April? Despite this being the most challenging year, are we likely to face the budgetary cuts? I mean, I'll pick up that briefly in terms of, I mean, obviously, I think we've been able to put additional unprecedented levels of additional support and funding into the system this year. I think 160 million in total, which has been really important in terms of supporting you and supporting learners through the pandemic. You know, you will be aware the UK government there's a comprehensive spending review. So in the next few months, Welsh Government will have a better sense in terms of how much of that comprehensive spending review comes to the Welsh bloc, and for Welsh Government to decide how it distributes that. There are pressures across the public services. You know, you'll all be aware in terms of the pressures on the NHS, but the Minister and us as officials are doing everything that we can to make a really strong case to ministers in terms of the ongoing support that you need in the system, and that includes obviously school budgets and so on and so forth. So, you know, we're working very closely with colleagues such as Gareth and so on to put that case. But you know, I think you'll all be aware that just kind of the wider pressures in terms of the economy and the financial system will play a part in this. But, you know, we're also hopeful, I should say, that actually for the first time in a long time, as long as I can remember, you know, we are hopeful that what we'll get from the UK government will be a 3-year budget. So that, you know, for the first time in a long time will enable us to kind of, and you to plan on the basis of the next 3 financial years rather than just the ad hoc kind of year ahead planning, which doesn't serve anybody well. So we're very hopeful on that too. Georgina, there's a question probably here for you. So, and again, it's something that was picked up with the Minister earlier, but since March 2020, schools and their staff have faced unprecedented stresses. On top of that, extra pressures of ALN reform and so on, and the impending new curriculum. Well-being of school leaders and all staff are probably at an all-time low. Is September 2022 really the best time for curriculum for Wales?
Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. This was something which the Minister did pick up a little bit, but I'm happy just to reflect on it a little bit more. And from what Owain said too about the publication of the Journey to 2022, which was seeking to be more of a one-stop shop and provide a bit more clarity on what was expected and where the support was and what the legislative requirements deriving from the Curriculum Assessment Wales Act were, to give schools a bit of clarity on exactly what was expected and as I say, the funding available. I think we need to continue to provide that clarity and simplicity and priority for what really matters around this, and how we can help schools create the space and participate in high priority types of activity to build their capability around this. So Owain also mentioned the national networks, which are starting this month, which will look at curriculum vision and progression, as well as resources, and practitioners are invited widely to be part of that, to start to talk about the sort of key parts of curriculum reform and to enable us to help people into that sort of place. And we're working with the regional consortia and Estin, both through the design of the national networks, but also trying to make sure that support is going to where it's needed, and that we are providing that sort of scaffold or safety net to enable schools to feel they've got the capacity to do this properly, because it is big and it is important. But I do also think it's important to think that we have been doing this for 5-6 years now, and we need to not forget that schools have come a really, really long way, and we've thought about a lot of this, and schools talk in these terms already. So I think what our priority now has got to be provide that confidence within schools that we can do this. And the point I mentioned also, that September 2022 isn't the end of the journey. In some senses, it's the beginning of the journey. We're not expecting everything to be done perfectly by 2022. We're expecting it to continue, and we'll get better, and we'll all work together to get better. So we want to be reassuring about that, and just make sure that we're providing the support is necessary to help that happen.
Thank you, Georgina. And Debbie, I think you wanted to come in.
Just really to reiterate and agree with some of the points that Georgina has made, but put some more of a local context on it probably. Just to say that from the position where I sit and my colleagues that I'm representing today, there is an overwhelming desire to work with partners in the middle tier to try to streamline the information that's coming through to you as school leaders. To try to find the space in the system for you, to try to look at where regional consortia can reduce any of that burden in the system along with our colleagues in local authorities. I think it's absolutely incumbent upon us all to ensure that we understand the pressures that you're facing and to keep listening. I don't think we can listen enough, and I don't think we can communicate enough. And I think the role that we have as regional consortia is to support and to listen and to make sense of the policy direction. And I think I would reiterate absolutely the point that September 2022 is a starting point. It's not the end. And what I would say is with colleagues in Eston, which I'm sure Claire would agree, there is some fantastic emerging practice across the system and some phenomenal engagement of school leaders that Eston are gathering through their engagement visits, that consortia have examples of through case studies, and I think we mustn't lose sight of the good work that is already taking place across our country, but be mindful absolutely of the challenges that still remain. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And I think Gareth probably wants to follow on from that from a local government perspective. So Gareth.
Ie, diolch. Dwi'n mynd i ateb yn Gymraeg, os maen nhw'n diadur fi'n Gymraeg fan hyn, felly wneud Owain yn credu gyfieithu. Dwi'n credu bod yr ateb yn cyfateb i sawl un o'r cwestiynau ynglyn â lles y gweithlu, a lles dysgwyr, a dwi'n cydnabod y pwysau aruthrol sydd ar ysgwyddau penaethiaid ysgolion ar hyn o bryd, nid yn unig i ddelio gyda y pandemig, ond hefyd i baratoi a cefnogi staff nhw wrth newidiadau sylweddol i ffordd mae'r ysgol yn gweithio o ran y cwricwlwm a diwygio anghenion dysgu ychwanegol. Ond y pwynt o'n eisiau i wneud yw bod na gydweithio ffeithiol yn digwydd ar hyd y lled Cymru rhwng arweinwyr ysgolion a hefyd staff awdurdod lleol a staff y gwasanaeth rhanbarthol hefyd. A mae'r cydweithio a'r bartneriaeth sydd wedi datblygu dros y flwyddyn a hanner diwethaf mynd i fod yn bwysig ac yn ddefnyddiol i ni wrth i ni mynd ar afel a'r heriau sydd o'n blaenau ni. A dwi'n hyderus mewn ffordd bod y berthynas rhwng yr awdurdod lleol, ysgolion a'r rhanbarth wedi cryfhau dros y cyfnod sydd wedi bod, oherwydd ni wedi goffo cydweithio i ddatrys problemau, ni wedi bod ar yr un daith, ond ni'n dod drwyddi gyda'n gilydd, a dwi'n hyderus mewn ffordd y byddwn ni'n gallu sicrhau llwyddiant y mentre yma hefyd. Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr, Gareth. So I'll summarise quickly, and then Philip, I've got a few questions on quals, if that's okay. So I think, Gareth, you were just reflecting in terms of actually the pandemic, by its very nature, has driven, it's driven further collaboration and closer relationships between heads, local authorities, and the consortia. And we have to learn from that and take the positives, and that will be even more crucial during this period. So there are very encouraging signs, and we need to build on that going forward. So I think that's the key point Gareth was making there. So Philip, if I can bring you in, I've got a number of questions that have come through on quals, if that's okay. So the first question, Philip, is around so qualified for the future. So qualified for the future consultation took place at a time where the energies and thoughts of the profession were very much focused on the great challenges we faced through the spring. Given the very limited engagement with the consultation and the seemingly controversial decisions reached, are these decisions set in stone? Is the first question, Philip. Okay. Will do. I'll move on then. I'm not sure whether. Can you hear me now, Philip? No, we've got technical issues there. Okay, I have one actually, Kevin, in terms of recruitment, which I wanted to pick up on. So Mark Powell makes the point, many schools are experiencing real challenges in recruiting high quality teachers, especially in certain subject areas. What is the Welsh Government plan to address this?
Okay, yeah, so let's start by saying this is a global problem, and it's been one for 5, maybe 8 years. We had our own flavour of it in Wales, because obviously we've got the additional challenge of having a Welsh medium sector that we need to find high quality teachers for. So for us, there's a kind of there's a couple of whammies. You know, one is getting high quality teachers. One is getting high quality teachers in particular subject areas where those subject areas industries competing for talent. You know, in science and some other areas, there's a genuine historical and industrial competition. So it's there as a real problem. We've got, so start with relatively good news. The relatively good news is that over the last 3 years, and it'll be because some of it will be because some of the things we've done, and some of it will be actually because of COVID, I think. Over the last 3 years, numbers are up year on year. So that's a good start, and we think it's not all COVID. What we think we're seeing is a response to some of the work we've been doing in marketing and championing the profession. We started that work about 2.5 years ago with EWC and a whole new approach to marketing the profession as a profession. And lots of you will have seen that. And I think we've seen the results of that. And there's pretty good evidence from our media and marketing analysts that there's a connection between what we've done in promoting the career of teaching and how we've managed to recruit people. So for me, I think the trajectory is a good one, but we mustn't just think that's enough. So what we're doing now is we'll continue with that marketing work. We'll continue to be quite aggressive as a profession, marketing ourselves in competition with other professions that are not unlike ours. And also in competition with other countries that are not so far away from us, if I can put it that way. If I've got one just about 20 miles from me, which is we actually send people there. We send parties out into the borders and other parts of the UK to say, you know, how different an experience it is to be a teacher in Wales, and we get results from that. We get returning teachers, and we get an interest from that geographical line from Manchester down through Hereford to Bristol and Bath. And then the last thing, and we're in the middle of doing this now, is how we use financial incentives to attract people into initial teacher ed. The jury is very much out on the evidence of whether that works or not, and it probably doesn't have much of an impact on the retention of teachers, but it does have an impact on the recruitment of them into initial teacher ed. So we're working on that now and how we prioritise that. We're also working with our colleagues in the universities and the regions on making the early career of a teacher a much more, I'll say comfortable, you know what I mean by that, because it's pretty uncomfortable at the moment, but a more comfortable, productive, positive and learning experience. And we hope by the middle of this school year to be able to come back out and talk to you about this early career support package that we've been working on with the regions, and which I know the Minister is really interested in. A lot of it happens now, but whether we articulate it clearly enough, whether every newly qualified teacher or third or year 3 practice teacher knows about it is another matter. So it's a bundle of measures. Sell the profession, make ITE good, make induction good, and then make that early career process something that teachers in the profession are attracted to. So there's plenty going on, but there's still plenty to do to keep that rise in recruitment on the right track.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Kevin. So, Philip, I'll just are you back with us now? Okay, you would try again. You were a bit muffled. Okay, we're clearly having we're having still technical issues. Okay, sorry.
Hear me now.
We can. You might have to speak up a bit. So what I'll try to do, Philip, because there are a number of questions coming through, I'll try and, I suppose, bring them into into
Can you hear me
one
now,
overarching.
Owen?
I can, yes.
Ah,
Can you hear me?
okay. Yes, I can hear you. Technical problems left, right and centre.
There we are, you're very clear now. So rather than kind of go through individual questions, I'll try and bring it into kind of an overarching one. And that's really, I suppose, to ask you your reflections on today's announcement, you know, plans for Qualified for the future, and how can the profession and head teachers get involved as part of that journey?
Sure. So I think it's worth reflecting on what we've actually announced today. So what are the decisions that we've made as a consequence of the consultation that took earlier this year? And the decisions that have been made are really around what are the main subjects going to be for GCSEs and some of the other subjects that might sit around those and complement directly those new GCSEs. So there are a wide range of views on all of these points. And as you'll see, if you look at the decisions report, there are lots of conflicting views on these subjects. What we've had to do, we've had to look at these in the round, think about what the curriculum is aiming to do in terms of broadening educational opportunities, finding ways, making more space for that. One of the criticisms of the current suite of qualifications has always been that it limits the range of optional subjects that people can take to further their interests. So what we try to do is to try and consolidate where we can to create more space to fulfill curriculum aims. But just thinking, those decisions that we've made up until now are very much what are the subject domains, what are the subjects going to be. There's a huge amount up for grabs now as we move into the next stage, now that we've made agreement on those subjects, about what they will look like in their substance. And that's thinking about the content that they'll need to cover, and importantly, the assessment methods that will be used. And thinking about the assessment methods, we're particularly keen on thinking about a couple of things. Thinking about the scope for more teacher assessment and how this can be involved in assessment more directly. Thinking about how the subsidiarity that's incumbent in the curriculum can come through. So what's the space for the local curriculum? How might be assessed? And there are lots of opportunities there in thinking about project work and other things that can allow greater scope for schools to have more direct control over assessments that they're delivering to their learners. And the other thing to look at is how we can sensibly introduce more digital assessment, thinking about these as qualifications that will be assessed, certified in 2027, thinking about these that will have some stretch into the future. Well, we've got to think about a vision for 10 years from now, not just for 2027, and think about how these qualifications can be assessed digitally and in more fulfilling ways for learners. And of course, as a consequence, also thinking about being more resilient to factors like the pandemic. So we're very keen, we're very open-minded. We're looking to engage with the profession and other stakeholders to really take us forward collaboratively in this next phase of development.
Okay, thank you, Philip, and apologies to those joining in terms of the quality of the sound there. So Claire, I've got a question for you and Estyn. So it starts by saying, I'm very pleased to hear all the comments about support, but for those of us in Estyn Review, the decision to change 6-month reviews from last February 2021 to December 2021 has not been very supportive at all. Can Estyn explain the reasons behind the 4-month extension?
I think it was to do with practicalities, and in order for us to make a decision when we remove a school from follow-up, we need to make sure that that system is fair, transparent and also robust. But we have been carrying out Estyn reviews in partnership with local authorities, and we have been able to take some schools out to follow-up, and others have remained in for another period of time because it was felt that would be appropriate. But when we do piloting, we will be using Estin Review as part of the pilots, but it is something that is under review. We'll be looking at the arrangements and whether they will feature longer term. Once we evaluate the pilot, there will be a discussion with practitioners, head teachers, local authorities and our colleagues in the middle tier as well as Welsh Government. But it is something that we try to be as fair as possible. But if individual schools have any concerns about our arrangements, I would encourage them to get in touch with me or one of my colleagues. We would certainly be happy to have a conversation if there are circumstances that head teachers would like to discuss with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. I'm conscious of time, so probably this would be the one final couple of questions for us. This actually is probably for myself, for Gareth and for Debbie. So this is about funding and in this person's words, annoying grants that we're expected to bid for. And that can include Welsh Government consortia or local authorities. So I suppose this is a big plea in terms of, you know, shouldn't we be looking at funding as a whole and ensuring that kind of as much as possible is streamlined and that it gets to the front line. So so who wants to kick off on that?
Yeah, I'll start then. I probably agree with whoever asked the question, and I think although probably we have welcomed the funding, additional funding over the past year and a half, sometimes it's been quite challenging in respect of the reporting arrangements and the accountability around that funding. However, I understand, you know, we have to show how we spend public money. I did welcome Owain's comment earlier about probably a 3-year kind of indication of budgets from the UK government. That will certainly support the Welsh Government and local authorities around how we manage budgets. I think we have to be kind of reasonable in the sense of the information we need back in regard to the funding, what it's been spent on, bearing in mind, of course, you know, we want to see the impact on the children, young people in our schools. However, you know, as a Director of Education, I have to kind of comply with audit requirements within my authority, and similarly consortia have to comply with financial regulations, but it's about maybe making those appropriate, you know, in the circumstances we're in. To be fair, Welsh Government have listened over the past year, and I think reporting requirements have been relaxed for some of the grant funding lines, and I think that's been welcomed by local authorities, certainly. Diolch.
I'll bring Debbie in now, but I'd certainly agree with that, Gareth. I think there is always room to simplify and to streamline as much as possible. You know, picking up on your point, we're in exactly the same position when it comes to both internal audit and Wales Audit Office. You know, we've all got a responsibility, haven't we, with public money to ensure that it's that it's spent in an appropriate way. But you know, certainly there is always room to look at how we can, I suppose, reduce burdens as much as possible in terms of schools and those on the front line. So, Debbie, did you want to say anything on this?
Just really to echo what Gareth and you have said, Owain. I felt encouraged when you talked possibly about a 3-year funded model, which would help some of the pressures for schools to be able to plan for more longer term interventions. From a consortia perspective, I know I speak on behalf of my colleagues and colleagues in local government. Our overwhelming priority is to make sure that we delegate, true delegation, as much resource to reach the front line as is absolutely possible to do. You are the people in the system that need to make these reforms happen, and we want to be able to do everything we can to support you. And just touching on the point around workload, I think we have a real will in the system to try to remove any unnecessary, the example Owain gave around bidding for grants. We need to find ways around that. And as I said previously, we need to listen to the ideas that you have as school leaders to help us to do that. I think the underlying message is we need to try to remove as much bureaucracy as we possibly can from the system. It's never going to be perfect, but we need to try to find a happy medium.
Thank you, Debbie. Debbie, no, I definitely agree and echo all of those. So I'm conscious of time, and I know that people have already been on this call after a very long day. So I'm going to bring it to a close now. I just want to say a couple of things before I do that. Firstly, we haven't managed to get to all of the questions that have been asked this afternoon. But what we will ensure that we'll do, because some of them are quite detailed, so we'll ensure that we look at those as the main themes coming out, and that we will respond as a Welsh Government to those over the next few weeks through, I'm sure there's a Curriculum for Wales blog, or in another way through DISC and so on and so forth. So everything will be captured and we'll get back to you. And we're very grateful in terms of the comments and the questions that you've posted this afternoon. Very grateful for you for joining and participating. The other thing I'd like to say, just for you to know, so we would appreciate feedback on this afternoon's event, and whether this is something you found kind of helpful, whether it's something that we should organise on a regular basis, maybe a termly basis where the Minister and others will come, and what may be some of the topics and the issues, if you do want these to be held on a regular basis, you'd like to maybe dive into in a bit more detail. So your views are very much appreciated on that. And then the final thing I should say, and it's back to Debbie mentioned earlier, the Minister mentioned that listening and feedback is really important. We're a small nation, a small country, and I think one of the benefits is in Wales that we can get all the relevant partners round the table, albeit virtually at the moment, and we can thrash out some of these issues and ideas. We won't always agree, but certainly I think we have the benefit to scale, which I think is very different to maybe what colleagues would face over the border in England. So that's really important. The Minister is really, really keen on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, in fact, to be hearing direct from the profession and from head teachers. So he's committed to that and is setting up a round table which will meet on a monthly basis. So I know that some colleagues maybe listening in have already nominated themselves to be part of those early round tables, but certainly we'll give you more details through DISC about opportunities over the coming months to be able to do that and to join the discussion. So diolch yn fawr iawn am gwrando ac yn cymryd rhan prynawn yma. Dyn ni yn gwerthfawrogi fe, fel wedodd y gweinidog, dyn ni yn ymwybodol faint o bwysau sydd arnoch chi ar hyn o bryd a pa mor galed yw e. So diolch yn fawr am eich amser. Thank you very much for joining this afternoon. As the Minister recognised early on, we're acutely aware of the pressures that you're under currently, and as the Minister said, hopefully over the coming weeks now we will start to turn a curve with COVID, and certainly we look forward to meeting with you and talking to you again. So diolch yn fawr a joiwch y penwythnos.